Welcome to the next episode of our Entity Component System tutorial. So we've got a little bit of technical debt, so to speak, to work on in this episode. We have the entity created, but right now we don't have any way inside of the entity to get its own handle. I want the entity to handle giving out the handles, so that one, you don't have to directly go and instantiate a handle yourself, but two, so that we can give the same handle out to anyone who asks while we're in phase, which would be a lot harder to do with instantiation, direct instantiation. We'd probably have to make some kind of static method and keep track of each entity component in a huge list, and it would just be a mess. So instead, we're just going to go ahead and have the entity keep track of its own handle, which makes sense because it's, well, the entity's handle, so it should have its handle. What I've done for this episode is I've gone and I've added these ignore statements, and those cause these yellow here to show up. And we can just go and take those out one by one and work our way through. The main thing you need to know is we're going to be doing a basic implementation of this handle so that this test can be run, as well as down here we've got tests that take the handle and cast it directly into a handle here. So we take the output and go directly into a handle. So basically all we're going to be doing is returning a handle. We're not going to be doing anything more than that. We're just going to instantiate a handle. Okay, so we're going to go in here and we're going to do public handle. So now we should be able to compile, I believe. You'll notice that this test is green here. That's simply because I already implemented it a little bit beforehand, just to get this test list to show up. So I'm going to run it again. You'll notice that returns diff has gone red. So what are we doing here? We are instantiate two different entities. Then we're getting a handle to the entity, and we are saying it is not equal to the handle of the other entity. And then we're doing the same thing. We're saying it's not the same handle as the other entity. Now, we also say is not null and is not null. Right now, we are returning a null handle. So how do we fix that? We just go and we say equals new handle. There we go. Oh, new handle this, right? This, which is not available in the current context. Okay, so we will go and grab this here, and we're going to say public entity new handle this. There we go. So now this will go and return a handle that is not the same for each of them and is not null. So we'll go ahead and run that test, and there we go. Now it succeeds. So what we need to do is unlock the next test. So we're going to say returns handle. We're going to unlock that. And then let's go ahead and run that test. Returns handle. Okay, so that succeeded because we're only asserting that it is of type handle, and that's it. So that one, of course, succeeds. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to unlock the next one, which is returns valid handle. So did we also solve that one? We did also solve that one. So now we just go and do the next one. This one simply goes and checks for the handles phase. We set up two entities. We set up a handle to each of them. Then we make sure that the handle equals the handle that we set up ourselves. So you'll notice we instantiate a handle directly ourselves. Then we go and we ask the entity handle for a handle, because we don't want to test anything on its own. We want handle to deal with the equivalency of handles there, because we don't want to be dealing with that ourselves. You know, we want to leave that to the entity handle. Then we go and we phase up the entity handle, and we say that they are not equal now because they should be out of phase, correct? And we say that for both of them. Then we grab new handles that we create ourselves, and we compare those to the handles that are returned by the entity and say, hey, are they the right handle, right? So now let's go ahead and run that, and that returns false. Now let's see why that's returning false. What it's saying is that the it's saying expected not equal to handle, but was equal to handle. Okay, so we look here on this line. Here we go. So it said we expected not equal, but it was equal. And the reason is we're not dealing with anything to do with our phase here, are we? So we're just going and saying, hey, this handle equals that. So how could we do this? There's a bunch of different ways we could do this. I'm personally liking the idea of just holding a private. So private a private variable for it, and then we set up a public property for it. So public handle with a get method, well, with a getter. Then in this getter, what do we actually want to do? We no longer need to do this here, right? Because we're not going to be actually instantiating that way. We don't actually need to instantiate the handle at all until the point at which the handle is actually needed by something, because there may be situations where an entity never actually needs to generate a handle, right? So in those situations, we want to just go ahead and say the entity handle equals something. So we say return handle, right? Because we're going to be returning what's in that handle when it is available. And then we're just going to simply do if the handle equals null. Then we're going to say here this.handle equals new handle, this. So we're saying the handle that we're storing internally is equal to this handle, right? So that's awesome. That'll go and it'll return the handle if the handle is null, right? So if the one we're storing is null. Now let's go ahead and run these tests and see how that turns out. So now we have, again, the same thing is failing. And why is it failing? It's failing because we're still not returning a different handle, right? So what we want to do here is we want to say if it's null or if the handle's phase, so the phase is not equal to this phase, there we go. So now what this is going to do is if the handle has gone out of phase or is not yet set, create and store the handle to this entity. And so I'm going to go ahead and put that in as a comment here. So we've got one of those comments and then the other one. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to return the handle, right? Whatever the current handle is. So let's go ahead and see how that works with our tests. We're going to go ahead and run all our tests again, and you'll notice that one's now passing. So what is our last test? Our last test here is saying that the handle should be the same if it is in phase. So now does our current solution solve that? It should, because the way we implemented it, we're only generating a new handle when that's the case, right? Because we're going and if it stays in phase, then it doesn't generate a new handle. But if it is out of phase, then it's going to go ahead and it's going to generate the new handle. And then it just returns whatever handle. So if we just call this and no phase has changed, we're simply just going to return the handle, and that's that. And that's really all we have to do other than some commenting. And the kind of comments I'm doing here, if you're not familiar with them, are a special type of comment that will go, and if we are working in an editor that supports it, like Visual Studio, which we're working in right now, when you hover over where it references that, it will go and it will say what is inside that comment. So here, for example, you can see the comment that's right above it. And if we hover over phase, it's the same. And handle, we're going to get that there. And this one, we're going to get that. Now, the nice thing is, if I were to go down here and I were to say handle, right, it's going to show up in our tooltip here on the side. And if we went and we actually use that for something, then it would show up if we hover here, which is awesome. But we don't want to do that, of course. So these are pretty much all the comments that we need in this file. And we're going to go ahead and just run everything again one more time to make sure that everything is still all good and everything checks out in our tests. And that's all we really have for this episode. I hope to see you again soon in the next episode. And I think in the next episode, we're going to be working on factories, if I'm not mistaken, which is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be dealing with the factory pattern and how to make it so that we can really implement any factory we need for any kind of object on the fly without having to know all of the factories beforehand and without having to have a whole bunch of bloat on top of our factories when we're going and defining our factories in code later for each individual type of object that we want to supply a factory for. See you all next time, and if these videos are helping you out, please remember to hit like down in the doobly-doo. And as always, you can find the source code to this in the GitHub repository down below in the doobly-doo.